Coming to us from Red Thread Games, who are most famous for their work on the also Norwegian, I don't know why I wrote that, obviously it's Norwegian, Dream Forward Venture series, which is a trilogy of games that use a science fiction meets fantasy setting to tell their story. I played a game called Draugen, which is a narrative adventure set far more in the real world.
How are we spelling that?
Draugen.
Gotcha.
If home is where one starts.
Sorry, it's described here as a fjord-noir mystery.
Perfect.
I love that.
If home is where one starts, that I talked about earlier, was a walking sim made on a skeleton budget by a team of one, Draugen represents the other end of the scale. What does money and expertise equal in this case? Motion captured and voiced characters and a very, very luscious Norwegian landscape rendered in Unreal Engine for a start. You play as a character called Edward. You can play as a character called Edward Harden. He's a naturalist. He's visiting the Norwegian village of Gravik with a young companion named Alice in search of his long missing sister Elizabeth. Having received a letter from Betty expressing her intentions to visit the remote village, Edward sets sail across the Atlantic to solve the mystery of his sister's whereabouts. This game is set in the 1920s, and although at first I felt like the dialogue lent so hard into the time period, it ended up feeling forced and almost anachronistic for trying to be too accurate. There were a few twists in the story that recontextualised my initial concerns, I'll say. I won't go into much more detail because it would spoil the whole thing, because this is very
travel.
This is very much a narrative to be led through. It's not time travel. But I'd encourage... Yeah.
Currently, my favourite thing to do when Sammy's watching something, or basically if we're watching anything, is to come in and say, the twist is it's 2025, which is great when you're watching any Disney film. And it's like, that's the twist. That's the twist. It's 2025. You'll see. As you were.
Yeah, I won't go into too much more detail because, to spoil the whole thing, it is very much a narrative that you're supposed to be led through. But I would encourage anyone who is mildly put off by the dialogue in the first 20, 30 minutes or so to persevere, as without giving anything away, there is intention and there is reason behind many of the artistic decisions that might otherwise kind of rankle at the start. The game takes place across a short week, with Edward and Alice gradually piecing together not only Betty's story, but also that of the inhabitants of Gravik. It is what appears to be an idyllic setting, but things are not quite right. And there is a really strong and prevailing sense of loss and loneliness that's embedded in every texture of this space. In terms of feeling Norwegian, on top of the obviously Norwegian field village setting, most of the text, like letters, signage, etc., it's all written in Norwegian. And Edward consistently tries to do his best to translate on the fly using kind of like pidgin language skills. It's really good. It lends the game a surprisingly effective sense of kind of linguistic claustrophobia, because you're trying to piece together exactly what's happening in Gravik, but you are patently aware that you're only ever getting part of the full picture, as Edward himself doesn't know the more challenging words or kind of like some of the colloquialisms that are kind of then skimmed over when he reads these letters out. It's a nice brisk playthrough. I beat it in 2 sittings. It took maybe 4 hours or so. I was well satiated by the end of it. I constantly come back to Firewatch as the best example of this genre. And whilst Draugen relies maybe a bit too heavily on certain noir and mystery tropes to deliver its story to get close to Firewatch, I think it is a very good game. I found the story and mystery really compelling, the performances are really solid, and the dialogue, even if a bit awkward to begin with, they're written quite deliberately for the occasion, and the narrative, unfurls nicely. It all makes sense. It all comes together well. I'm really aware that this is perhaps not as long as a review as I usually like to give for these round the world games, but it's extremely hard to talk about a mystery narrative without accidentally giving up the mystery.
Yeah.
I can say it's a first person walkabout and interact sort of game. I can say the actors do a good job. But as soon as I talk about anything that actually happens past the pair landing their boat on the Gravik shore, it all potentially eats into what makes the game fun and compelling to play. So I'll just cut it reasonably short and say it is really good. Play it if you want. Look up spoilers if you don't want. but that's Draugen, and it's a very Norwegian game. It feels Norwegian. We often talk about kind of like games having this sense of kind of localization in them in terms of like where they're from. And because of the setting, and like I said, because of the way that things are shown and not shown in kind of a very native presentation, it is very Norwegian. And
yeah.
I think it's a really, really nice time. even if the story obviously is not always meant to be nice. But it's it's a pleasant place to run about, and then things might happen.
Ah, that's nice. That's nice. And two, like, I mean, Moomins is Finnish, not Norwegian, but feels Scandinavian, as does this. So yeah, what a lovely trip we've just had.
Yeah.
What a lovely trip.